The US government offered to buy Greenland from Denmark, and that happened just after World War II. The price tag was $100 million in gold.
The United States didn't just build a city under Greenland's ice. They buried a nuclear reactor inside it, ran 600 missiles worth of secret tunnel tests around it, and when the whole thing failed, they left 9,200 tons of toxic waste in the ice and walked away. They told the country that owned the land it was a science project. They told their own allies it was harmless. And now, 60 years later, the ice is melting, the waste is reportedly moving toward the ocean, and 3 governments are arguing over who has to touch it. Nobody's winning that argument, and the ice doesn't care. The city that shouldn't exist. The tunnels weren't built for science. That was the story the Army told newspapers, Denmark, and every documentary crew they let in. Camp Century, the so-called city under the ice, was presented as a peaceful research station where American scientists studied weather and glaciers in some of the harshest cold on Earth. The footage looked perfect. Soldiers ate steak in a warm mess hall. There were hot showers, a barber shop, a library, a chapel, and even a movie theater. All of this was hidden in tunnels carved 40 feet below the Greenland ice sheet, 150 miles from the nearest airbase and 800 miles from the North Pole. At the center of this small town was a machine that people were told not to ask about. It was a nuclear reactor called the PM-2A, reportedly the first portable nuclear power plant ever built. It was shipped to Greenland in pieces on cargo planes and pulled 138 miles across the ice on sleds. The reactor used 44 pounds of uranium enriched to 93%, the same level used in weapons. It powered the lights, heated the buildings, and made the steam that kept 200 men alive during Arctic winters cold enough to freeze exposed skin in less than a minute. The Army even made a television special. A show called The Big Picture showed Camp Century to people across America, claiming it proved the United States could build civilization anywhere, even inside a glacier. Families saw soldiers playing pool and eating ice cream while the temperature outside dropped to 50 below zero. It was the most expensive recruitment ad the Arctic had ever seen. But the cameras never showed the tunnels hidden behind the main ones. These tunnels were much too wide for moving supplies and were reinforced with huge steel arches built to withstand pressures no normal science station would ever face. And those tunnels had a name that Denmark wouldn't learn for another 30 years. Project Iceworm. The real plan wasn't to study ice, it was to hide inside it. Declassified military documents later showed what Camp Century allegedly was, a test site for the biggest secret weapons project the Arctic had ever seen. According to those documents, the plan was to dig 4,000 kilometers of tunnels under the Greenland ice sheet, longer than the width of the United States, and fill them with 600 nuclear missiles on underground trains. The missiles would keep moving on tracks beneath the ice, so the Soviet Union could never find them. There would reportedly be 52,000 square miles of frozen launch pad, 60 launch centers, and 11,000 soldiers living underground. It was an invisible nuclear arsenal aimed at Moscow over the North Pole. Denmark, which owned Greenland, had agreed to let the Americans build a research station. But according to later investigations, no one asked Denmark about the missiles, the railway tracks, or the 600 nuclear warheads. The ice was meant to make all of this possible. The glacier, thought to be stable and permanent after 1 billion years, seemed like the perfect place to hide the world's deadliest weapons. But the ice had other plans. Glaciers are always moving. They flow, compress, and shift. Soldiers with electric chainsaws worked non-stop, cutting back walls that slowly pushed inward. Steel rails bent and ceiling arches strained under the weight of ice that would not stay in place. The reactor, linked to a network of pipes and vents, also shifted as the ground moved beneath it. The reactor itself was a problem that was never discussed in public. It weighed 330 tons, and the Army called it portable only because each part could fit inside a C-130 cargo plane. On the day it first started up, October 3, 1960, engineers reportedly shut it down right away because it was leaking neutrons. These invisible particles pass through walls and harm human tissue slowly and silently, much like sunlight fades paper. The Army tried to fix the problem by building shields from 55-gallon drums filled with ice and sawdust, a solution more suited to a garage than a nuclear plant. The reactor ran for 33 months, producing heat, electricity, and according to later reports, much more radiation than expected. Cooling water reportedly leaked from pipes, carrying many radioactive isotopes straight into the ice. The men working nearby did not wear dosimeters, and according to available records, no one tracked how much radiation they were exposed to. By 1963, Project Iceworm was over. The ice would not cooperate, and the tunnels collapsed faster than crews could repair them. The Joint Chiefs of Staff cut the funding, and the Army began packing up, but they didn't pack up everything. The man who walked in alone. In 1964, deep inside a tunnel 40 feet beneath the ice, a Geiger counter began to shriek. The man holding the device was Commanding Officer Joseph Franklin. His team was there to take apart the PM-2A reactor and send it back home. But before any of his soldiers went into the reactor tunnel, Franklin reportedly went in by himself. He refused to let anyone else near it. He wanted to check the radiation levels before risking his men. He spent just 2 minutes inside a field he estimated at 2,000 rads per hour. For comparison, a single dose of 400 rads can be deadly. In those 2 minutes, Franklin reportedly took in about 60 rads, the amount you might get in the time it takes to brush your teeth. After returning to the United States, the Army sent Franklin to Bethesda Naval Hospital. There, he stood inside a whole-body radiation counter, a machine used to check people exposed to nuclear accidents. The results confirmed what Franklin already suspected. He was radioactive. His team spent 18 months taking apart the reactor in conditions that would alarm any modern safety inspector. Cutting metal pipes released radioactive dust. Snow, exposed to leaking neutrons for years, reportedly let out radioactive ice flakes when bulldozed. Franklin almost certainly breathed some of it in. The Army sent the reactor vessel back to the United States and buried it in a nuclear waste site in Idaho. They removed the fuel rods and the core, but they left everything else behind. That meant 9,200 tons of physical waste, buildings, vehicles, railway tracks, and equipment. There were 53,000 gallons of diesel fuel and 63,000 gallons of wastewater, including sewage and radioactive coolant. No one knows how much polychlorinated biphenyls were left, chemicals so toxic they were later banned worldwide. Army records indicate that 47,100 gallons of liquid radioactive waste were poured straight into a hole in the ice. A real cleanup would have taken years. It would have needed heavy equipment, lots of workers, and international supervision. The United States would also have had to explain to Denmark and the world what those huge tunnels were for, why there were railway tracks, and why 600 nuclear warheads were hidden under an ally's land without permission. So they didn't clean it up. They packed up the reactor, sealed the entrances, and left. Their reasoning was apparently simple. Every year, northern Greenland gets more snow. The ice always grows thicker. In a few decades, the whole base would be buried so deep that no one could ever reach it. They believed the snow would never stop. Joseph Franklin later became a major general. He led a combat engineer battalion in Vietnam, taught nuclear engineering at West Point, served as commandant of cadets, and retired as one of the Corps of Engineers' most decorated officers. In 2002, doctors removed a cancerous prostate and kidney. By 2015, the cancer had spread to his lungs and bones. He died on March 8, 2017, at the age of 83. The 2 minutes he spent alone in that reactor tunnel stayed with him for the rest of his life. Even his obituary mentioned it. They thought it would snow forever. The gamble made sense in 1967. Northern Greenland was gaining ice and the numbers supported it. Each year, new snow pressed down into layers over the old, and Camp Century sank deeper. By the 1980s, it was buried under 30 meters of solid ice, about as tall as a 10-story building. By the 2000s, it was closer to 60 meters. It became a frozen vault, sealed by nature, meant to keep its secrets locked away forever. The military's whole plan relied on one idea. Here, the ice only moves downward. It builds up, covers things, and never returns what it buries. They studied thousands of years of snowfall and saw a trend that always pointed deeper into the ground. No one asked what would happen if that trend changed, because in 1967, nobody thought it could. The problem is, forever ended up lasting only about 60 years. Greenland is now losing ice at a rate that would have sounded impossible to the men who built Camp Century. The Arctic is warming twice as fast as the rest of the planet. Temperatures in Greenland have reportedly jumped about 7 degrees Fahrenheit since 1991 alone. The ice sheet, roughly the size of Mexico and up to 2 miles thick in places, is losing mass at a rate hard to picture unless you put numbers on it. Every single second, Greenland loses about 8,000 tons of ice. Think of a fully loaded 18-wheeler truck. Now picture 200 of them. Now imagine all 200 vanishing every second of every day. That's the rate. It doesn't stop at night. It doesn't slow down on weekends. If the entire sheet were to melt, sea levels worldwide would rise over 23 feet, enough to put most of Miami, lower Manhattan, and the coast of Bangladesh permanently underwater. The meltwater doesn't just stay on the surface. It finds cracks and flows down through channels and fissures hundreds of feet deep, bringing warmth from above into the ancient ice below. For the first time ever, liquid water is reportedly reaching the depth where Camp Century lies, 30 to 60 meters beneath the surface. When that water reaches the buried waste, the ice stops acting like a freezer and starts acting like a solvent. The water seeps into rusted metal containers, mixes with diesel fuel, and pulls toxic chemicals out of old paint and plastic. The worst are the polychlorinated biphenyls, industrial chemicals that don't break down in nature. They build up in fat tissue, so every small fish that absorbs a little passes a bigger dose to the fish that eats it, then to the seal that eats that fish, and finally to the person who eats the seal. These chemicals were banned worldwide decades ago because they cause cancer, harm the immune system, and interfere with child development. Now they're sitting in the ice, reportedly dissolving into the meltwater. Radioactive particles that were trapped in solid ice for decades are now released into the same meltwater, free to move wherever gravity carries them. Everything follows gravity, flowing through natural channels inside the glacier slowly and steadily toward the edge of the ice sheet. Its final destination is the North Atlantic Ocean. 3 flags, no owner. Toxic waste is moving toward the water, and no one is taking responsibility. The United States claims it gave the land back to Denmark in 1967. The 1951 defense treaty that allowed the base did not include any rules about cleaning up the environment. There were no guidelines for what to do with 9,000 tons of toxic waste left under another country's ice. American officials reportedly say that since the treaty was signed before modern environmental laws, whoever owns the land now is responsible. Denmark rejects that argument, calling it dishonest. Danish officials say their government only agreed to a peaceful science station because that is what the United States said they were building. Denmark allegedly never approved a nuclear missile test program or a secret weapons project on their land. Their view is clear. The United States lied about its plans, left behind toxic waste, and now expects Denmark to handle the problem. Meanwhile, the people who live in Greenland are stuck between these two governments. About 56,000 people live in Greenland, and 88% are Inuit. Their families have fished and hunted in these waters for generations. Fishing makes up more than 90% of Greenland's exports. The economy depends on the health of the surrounding ocean, with seal, narwhal, halibut, and shrimp all vital. According to surveys, 3 out of 4 Greenlanders say they have already felt climate change in their daily lives, with thinner ice, disrupted hunting seasons, and changing animal migrations that have shaken traditions passed down through families. These are the people whose water is now threatened by the waste. They do not have the billions of dollars or special technology needed for a cleanup. Their leaders say this is a violation of their rights. The Inuit Circumpolar Conference has brought the issue to the world's attention, but no one is listening. The people most affected by a decision reportedly made in a Pentagon meeting in the late 1950s have the least power to fix it. A 2016 study in Geophysical Research Letters confirmed scientists' fears. The waste will likely re-enter the environment around 2090, or even sooner. The contaminated area is an estimated 136 acres, about the size of 100 football fields. William Colgan, the lead researcher, told reporters that no one has drilled into the debris field because no one knows exactly what is buried there. While 3 governments argue over a growing problem, the country that caused it decided it wanted to own Greenland. In January 2026, the United States would not rule out using military force to take Greenland from Denmark. What was reportedly the largest protest in Greenland's history filled the streets of Nuuk. NATO allies sent troops, and the diplomatic crisis lasted for weeks. No one mentioned Camp Century during those talks. The full story of Project Iceworm only became public in 1997. Denmark apparently had no idea that the United States had tested a nuclear missile system on their land without permission. The secret lasted longer than the base itself. The core they forgot. There is one more part to this story, and it makes everything even more terrifying. In the 1960s, scientists at Camp Century drilled ice cores as part of the cover story. They drilled nearly a mile down, 4,560 feet, and pulled up a 12-foot tube of soil and rock from the bedrock. At the time, it was reportedly the deepest ice core ever taken, a real scientific achievement, though it happened under the shadow of a weapons program. After that, the core was forgotten. The core was moved between military freezers for years. In the 1970s, it went to the University of Buffalo, and in the 1990s, it was sent to Denmark. At some point, it allegedly ended up in cookie jars at the bottom of a freezer. No one looked at it or paid attention. It sat there for more than 50 years. In 2017, someone found it during a routine freezer transfer. Andrew Christ, a researcher at the University of Vermont, was reportedly just 4 days from defending his dissertation when a colleague asked him to examine the core. He washed the sediment under a lab faucet, expecting to see dirt and crushed rock, which is typical at the bottom of an ice core. But he found something that made him pause. He found perfectly preserved fossil plants and moss, leaves, twigs, and tiny pieces of a living world, frozen in time and still looking fresh. These were not ancient fossils crushed by the ice. They were delicate, intact, and flash-frozen. Christ later explained that ice sheets usually destroy everything in their way, but these plants were so well preserved they looked like a time capsule from before the ice arrived. The team published their findings in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2021 and again in Science in 2023 with a stronger conclusion. Greenland was apparently completely ice-free just 416,000 years ago, give or take about 38,000 years. This was not millions of years ago, as scientists once thought, but much more recently. At that time, carbon dioxide levels were about 280 parts per million, much lower than today's 422. Consider what that means. The ice sheet the military relied on, which they thought would last forever, has melted completely before. That happened when there was much less carbon dioxide in the air than there is now. Less heat, less pressure, and less cause. The proof came from scientists studying the same ice core the military drilled for their cover story. The research that was supposed to be a cover story ended up proving that the military's plan could never have worked. Camp Century is no longer a city under the ice. Now, it is a ticking clock. The waste field covers the area of 100 football fields, and for the first time, warm meltwater is reportedly reaching it. Diesel, radioactive water, and chemicals that can poison every fish in the food chain are all moving toward the ocean that supports 56,000 people who never asked for this. Scientists found a hidden nuclear city under Greenland's ice, and it is frightening, not because of what the military built, but because of what they left behind and what the melting ice may soon reveal. No government has taken responsibility. No cleanup has started. No one has drilled into the debris field because no one knows exactly what is buried there. Colgan, the scientist who first modeled the melting timeline, told a reporter something that should worry everyone. We don't actually know the full nature of what's down there. This ice has melted before, and today's carbon dioxide levels are 40% higher than they were the last time. The military built a city under the ice, tested a secret nuclear weapons system, allegedly lied to the country that owned the land, left behind enough poison to contaminate an ocean, assumed it would stay hidden forever, and then, 60 years later, tried to buy the island. Now the cost is being paid by the ocean.